This my time, this my truth, so let me tell it how it is. See my story, his glory, I survived so you can live. Hell spoke, they told lies, now you gon' finally hear my side. Step to the mic, take back my seat, oh yeah, we lied. Hell, you spoke for too long, drag my name for too long. Thought you keep me mute, but no you won't now. It's my turn, so shut the hell up, the hell up.
Hey, welcome back to Shut the Hell Up with yours truly, Miss Mo. I want to send a special shout out as always to you, amazing producer, Mr. Fossil. I want to thank you, amazing listeners, for joining me with another episode of Shut the Hell Up. Yes, I am serving notice on hell to shut up. You've been speaking and running your mouth far too long, and it's my time, my turn to tell my story. I want to thank you all for joining me, and this podcast episode is my first heartbreak. I left you on the last note, the beginning. I brought you to a place when I was between the ages of 4 and 5, living with my parents, and how I was trained to deal and be attracted to dysfunctional, toxic, and abusive relationships. And as I do part 2 with my first heartbreak, is that we all know that our first love are our parents, and they are the ones that we look up to, we admire, and that we love with everything in us. And when that is not right and that is not good, that is our first heartbreak. And so as I prepare to bring you into my story, I pray that you have open hearts and minds, and that there is no judgment, because all of us came from something that we all need to heal from, work on, and be honest about. And I'm just here to let you know that I'm not ashamed of where I come from and came from. And I am so happy for my experience, because without my experience, I wouldn't be able to teach others, because you first learn and then you teach. So come on in and sit with me as I bring you to my point of my first heartbreak. God bless you all. I appreciate you, and I'm so glad I am free to tell my story, my truth, and God's glory. As I said, it was around the ages between 4 and 5. My parents, all I remember is the fights and the arguments. And then one day, when we went to my dad's sister's house, she was my favorite aunt. Yes, she was my favorite aunt at that time. And I remember going there and we pulling up in front of the house, and the family were running out and hey, they jumping and hugging my dad and speaking to my mom. And and speaking to us, but I remember them grabbing my oldest sister, rest wherever you are, and grabbing her and picking her up, and everyone surrounding her and saying how beautiful she is. And look at her eyes, because at that time her eyes would change colors. With whatever outfit my mother would put her on, her eyes would change colors to try to resemble the outfit color she had on. And I remember as this little girl standing there, and I can remember in my head, what about me? A couple of people came and spoke to me, but it was not that embrace that I saw my sister receive, and I saw the smiles on their faces and their eyes lit up, and oh, what a joy it was to hold her in their arms. And so my aunt, she made me feel special. She loved on me, and I was okay. I was satisfied. I just wanted the same love and attention that my oldest sister had, and I wished at that moment I could remember wishing I was her, because something about her made everybody glad, and I wanted that experience. So I'm thinking we're just going to visit, not knowing that would be our home. And so I was a bit confused, because we were at home one minute, and then now we were calling my aunt's home our home. And she had children and a husband, and her children were older than us, and they were a bit fun and a bit a mess. But I really, really, really loved my aunt, because I can remember her being in the kitchen all the time, cooking and listening to music, and a little bit dancing with one of my cousins. Used to come in here, and he used to shake your booty, shake your mama, and he used to dance. And so I loved going into the kitchen. And then I look at myself in my older years, and music is always playing while I'm cooking and I'm dancing, and I'm enjoying myself. So I thank you, Auntie. I thank you for setting the stage for me, and letting me know that it's okay to enjoy your kitchen and enjoy what you're doing. And so I remember days just being in the kitchen with my aunt. At this time, I barely remember my mom being around. My mom would be in and out, and my cousins will always say to me that your mom is dead, and I would jump up and look out the window, because my mom was like, you couldn't cage her, you couldn't keep her in the house. She was gone all the time. And so I would look out the window, and I remember they would point and say, she's over there across the bridge, across the water in Mississippi, dead somewhere. And tears will roll down my eyes, and I will look at them and say, I want my mom. Why would you say that? I remember that moment having so much love for her, and not having any love from my mom, but it was just something in my heart that always wanted to love her and wanting her to love me back. But my dad, I didn't have that problem with him. I was a daddy's girl, and my dad will come home and hug on me and pick me up and give me a kiss, and then he will have his drink. He always had a drink. And he would stand around and talk and laugh. And I remember one of his nieces admired him so much. I mean, she would look at him and smile, and always in his arms, and he always hugging her. But I didn't think too much into that. I just thought, she loved her uncle. so as time went on and went on and went on, my mom will be in and out, as I said, and my dad, I will wait on the curb for him to come home from work. And when he will pull up, I will just jump up and down, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And he will get out the car and come over to the sidewalk, and I will run and jump into his arms, and he will pick me up and kiss me on my cheek and say, Daddy's girl, Daddy love you. And I will be, I love you, Daddy, I love you, Daddy. It brought me so much joy because he never missed a beat on expressing his love for me. And when he puts me down, I will run to my siblings and say, my daddy's home, my daddy's. I was so excited about my dad and about him recognizing me because, as I stated before, my family, they loved me, but their eyes was always set on my oldest sister because she was light-skinned, hazel eyes. Sometimes they were brown, sometimes they were green, and sometimes they had a pinch of blue, but they admired that about her. And so that I, as I said, I wanted to be her, but I didn't know how important it was just to be myself. I didn't know that back then I didn't know. No one encouraged me or guided me or led me into believing that I was all right just being me. But the attention that she received made me want to be someone other than myself. Isn't it like that today? That we don't like who we are. We can't embrace all of us. We look at other people and wish we had their eyes, their nose, their smile, their curvy hips, their bust, their breasts being big. And we just wished we had everything somebody else had instead of being okay with everything we have, because people can make you feel like the way you look, the way you are is not enough. And so they gravitate to what brings them joy and what they like the most in someone else. So that was my beginning of not liking who I was and not feeling that I was good enough or beautiful enough to get the same attention that my beautiful sister received at that time. So it was kind of hard for me watching them grab and just constantly talk about, look at her eyes, look at her, oh, she's so cute, no, give her to me, I had her first. So I had to watch that, and no one picked me up and fought over me that way. So it was kind of a bothersome in the inside of me. And so when my dad came home and he came around, somebody saw me. He seen me, he saw me, and I mattered. I mattered enough for him to pick me up and hug on me and give me a kiss on my cheek. And as I said again, my aunt made me feel special as well. And as I'm moving on along with my story, I had this cousin, her daughter. She was kind of a bit of a wild child, let me say that, with no judgment. She would like to go to the store and steal, and she would always take me with her. And this particular day, she took me to the store and she stole some candy and some chips, and she blamed it on me. And I remember standing in the kitchen telling my aunt, I didn't do that. She stole, she's lying. And that was the beginning of people lying on me and me fighting to tell my truth. And that is what this podcast is about, as me clearing the lies and telling my truth. It is important. It is important that no matter how many times people choose to lie on you, defame your character, and blame you for things that are untrue and unreal about you, that it's important that you mustered up enough courage to tell your story, your truth. And no matter who agrees or not, it is your responsibility and priority to tell your truth. And tears running down my eyes and my face, and I'm saying to my aunt, I didn't steal. So my cousin on another day asked if I would go to the store with her in front of her mom, and I said, no, because you lie on me all the time and you blame me for stuff that I didn't do. And she promised, I'm not gonna lie on you. Please, please, please go to the store with me. And I gave her another chance. Just like in life, we give people chances after chances after chances, no matter how much they try to convince us that I won't do it again. I won't slap you again. I won't curse you out again. I won't lie on you again. I won't steal from you again. I won't backstab you and talk about you again. I won't. And yet, we're gracious enough and merciful enough to give them another chance, and which I did for my cousin. I gave her another chance. And so this particular day, we walking, going to the store, and I remember I was a very observing child. I watched and I listened. I watched and I listened. And I remember as we were walking, I looked across the street, and as she said, come on, let's cross over, we ran across the street, and there was this building, but on top and on bottom, at the bottom, the door was open, and I saw these chairs lined up next to each other in rows. And I looked down and I said to my cousin, what is that? And she said, I don't know, let's go see. And we walked down the stairs tiptoeing because we didn't want to make any noise. And as we walked into that space, there was a woman sweeping the floor. She had this long robe on that you couldn't see her feet, her legs, her arms were covered, her neck was covered. All you can see was her hand and her face. And she had a cap on her head, not a baseball cap, but one of those turbans that the mothers in the Lord in the church wear. And she had that on her head. And I looked at her and I said, what is this? And she said, this is a church. And I said, what is a church? And she said, this is where people come to pray and have service. And when she looked at me, she said, can I pray for you? And I had a smile on my face and I said, yes, ma'am. Because in St. Louis, we were raised to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. So I said, yes, ma'am. She walked away from me and grabbed this bottle of oil, as I know that we use today. And she put it in her hand, some oil, and she anointed my head. And she looked at me and she said, you're going to go through some things in life. It's going to be real hard for you. And you're going to go through a lot, but God is going to be with you. And so therefore, I have to pray for you that God keeps you. She prayed over me. And I remember after she prayed over me, I said, can I come to church? And she said, yes, on Sunday, you can come to church. And I don't remember her praying for my cousin, but I remember my cousin looking at me strangely like, what is wrong with you? But this joy hit me so richly and abundantly in I can identify that place now that I'm older and I understood. I didn't understand then, but I understand now. And it was a joy of excitement. That moment was a moment I got to know my God, and I built a relationship instantaneously in that place. I was so excited that when we left out, we went to the store, and I couldn't wait to get back home so that I can tell my auntie that I'm going to church on Sunday. And by the time we got to the store and back to the house, I ran through the front door, ran down the hallway into the kitchen. Auntie, I'm going to church on Sunday. This lady prayed for me. My aunt grabbed me and hugged me. She was so excited for me. I was jumping up and down, and I had so much joy. I couldn't wait till my mom came home and my dad came home, and I was waiting just anxiously, like, hurry, I can't wait to tell them. My mom walked through the door, and I ran to her. Mom, I'm going to church on Sunday. My mother had this hard look on her face and rolled her eyes and told me to get the F out of her face. And she walked down the hall. She didn't have no joy. She didn't ask me any questions. She just walked down the hall towards the kitchen. I still had my exciting joy bubbling in my stomach, and I was anxiously waiting for Dad. Later, Dad came home and he opened the door. I jumped off the couch and I ran to him, and I jumped in his arms as usual. He came a little late. It was nighttime, and so I couldn't wait at the curb for him like I would usually do. So I jumped in his arms, and he held me and kissed me on my cheek, and Daddy loves you, Daddy, baby girl. And he carried me over to the couch and sat down, and I said, Daddy, guess what? I went to this church today, and I'm going to church on Sunday. This lady prayed for me. And my dad put a smile on his face, and he said, that's good. And then he started talking to the ones that were in the room, and I got up and went to go play with my siblings. And the next day when Daddy came in, Daddy had 3 beautiful dresses. I mean, they were so pretty, and he surprised me. And he said, look what I got for you so that you can have dresses for church. I jumped up and down. I was so excited. I was excited because I was not only excited that I was going to church, but my daddy, he went out and brought me beautiful dresses. And so I was looking forward to Sunday. I got outside, began to play with my siblings and the neighborhood children. And the day went on. And so by the time it was time for us to come in and get ready for dinner in bed, my cousin started to torment me again about your mother is dead, because again, she was not at home. And tears rolled down my face, and I was scared, wanting my mom. And I remember me and my siblings in the bedroom, because my aunt, it was a pretty nice size house. It wasn't huge, but we had to share a room. And I remember falling asleep, and the next morning arrived, and all I can hear was the children outside screaming, laughing, and throw me the ball. I just heard so much going on outside. I jumped up and I looked out the window, and I saw them playing, and something in my spirit, and I didn't understand me at that moment, but I knew that that day was going to be a sad day for me. My mind instantly went to my dad, and I felt sad, and I couldn't understand why I felt that, why I had that unction, and I knew that that day was not a good day. I jumped off the bed, ran to the bathroom, grabbed my toothbrush, brushed my teeth, washed my face, ran downstairs, ran into the kitchen, and I found my aunt cooking breakfast. And I ran up, I spoke to her, hugged her, ran outside with my siblings, and I didn't feel right. I just wanted to see my dad, and I felt like that would be my last time. And I didn't know how to ponder that. I didn't know how to verbalize that. I didn't know who to talk to, who to share what I was experiencing on the inside. I ran to my oldest sister like I used to all the time, and I said her name, and I said, something doesn't seem right. And she was a tomboy, always wrestling, playing with the boys and throwing balls. And she was like, what doesn't seem right? I said, I don't know. Something doesn't seem right today. I feel sad. And she said, oh, well, I'm having fun, and ran off. Oh, my God. And I walked back towards the porch, and I sat there. And my aunt and her husband left and said that they will be back later. And they left her children there to keep us. Again, I don't know where Mama was at, but I knew Daddy was at work. And I sat on the porch, and I felt sad, so I got up and I went in the house, and my cousin, my aunt's daughter, was in the bathroom. And she was making up her face with makeup. And I remember standing there looking at her. She was a very chocolate, dark-skinned woman, young woman at that time. And she was beautiful. But I was admiring how she was making up her face. And I looked at her and I said, are you going out on a date? And she said, no. And I said, are you making your face up for your boyfriend? She said, no. And she had this smile on her face. She was excited. And I stood there and watched her. And she looked at me and she said, you're going to go outside and you're not going to act like you have to use the bathroom. Y'all all are going to stay outside and play. And do not come back in the house. So she said, go outside and play. And I looked at her and I walked down the stairs, and again I was saddened in my heart. And I went outside and I ran to my sister again, and I said, I won't say her real name, but let's just say, Paula said we cannot come back in the house, and we better not pretend like we have to use the bathroom. And my sister said, I don't care, and ran off playing again. So I stood by the curb and I waited. And I waited and I waited for my daddy. I couldn't play because that feeling just wouldn't let me loose, and it just wouldn't let me be. And finally, my dad pulled up. I could see the car coming up the street. And as he parked, I had a bit of joy and sadness at the same time. And when he got out of his car and came over to the curb, I ran and jumped in his arms, and he hugged me so tight, and he said, Daddy loves you, and he kissed me on my cheek. And I remember wrapping my arms so tightly around his neck, and I laid my head on his shoulder, and I held on to my daddy. And my cousin Paula ran out the door, and she started calling my daddy's name and hugging him and telling me to get down. And I wouldn't let him go. I wouldn't let him go. I felt like that would be the last hug that I would receive from my dad, and I didn't know how I knew that, but I knew. And she kept saying, get down, Monique. And my dad put me down and she grabbed his arm. And I went to come towards the steps and she said, what did I say? Stay outside and you better not come in the house. And I sat on that porch and I was sad. And me, again, you tell me, don't look, don't listen. I was that child. I want to know why I couldn't go in the house. So I ran to my sister again and I told her again, and my sister again told me the same thing. I don't care. And she continued to play. So I made up in my mind, I'm going in the house and I'm going to pretend like I have to use the bathroom. So I walked with butterflies in my stomach because I was so afraid of getting in trouble if I went in the house. But I was so afraid of something not being right. So I walked up the steps and I turned the doorknob and I opened the door softly and quietly pushed it closed. And I heard this moaning in the house. And I'm saying to myself, what is that? And the moaning just kept going and going. And so I tiptoed, and my aunt's living room was not that far from the front door, but when you come in, it was right on the left side. And as I tiptoed and tiptoed, by the time I got to the arch of the living room, I looked to my left, and my dad and his niece. My dad was on top of her. Her legs was up on his shoulders. The cover were on them, and he was having sex. They were having sex. And I stood there with my mouth open, my eyes bucked, and my soul shaking with fear. And all I could hear myself saying is, I hope my mom doesn't come in that door. As soon as I said that, the door opens. I looked to the left and it was my mother. My mother came in, shut the door, walked to the living room, and the scream that came out of my mother, I can still hear it today. And my mother screamed and cried and yelled, and she went for both of them. My dad jumped up, grabbed his pants, tried to put his pants on. He had a wife beater on. And my cousin jumped off of the bed couch and grabbed the cover and wrapped herself up and ran into the corner and saying, Elaine, please, don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. I'm sorry. And my mother was about to kill her, and my dad jumps in the way. And he's trying to calm her down, and she's in rage, and I'm standing there stuck. I couldn't move. And I'm watching this, and tears rolling down my face, and my mother cursing them out and saying how she's going to kill them. And she went to the house phone and picked up the phone and called her mother. And she's screaming in the phone, Mom, this mother effer, he's in here effing his niece. And she's screaming, and I can hear my grandmother yelling, what are you talking about? And my mother yelling through the phone. And I heard my grandmother say, I told you he was no good and you wouldn't listen. And my mother looks at me and she said, go get your siblings and y'all pack y'all and we getting the F out of here. My grandmother said, I'm on my way. And I tell you, it seemed like my grandmother was there in 5 minutes. It was so fast. I couldn't at first, I couldn't move, and my mother yelled again. And she yelled again, and finally I was able to move, and I ran out the door, and I ran to get my siblings, and I said, Mama said, come and pack our stuff. I came in the house, my mother was throwing things, and she said, get your stuff. And we ran upstairs and got bags and just threw stuff in a bag. I forgot about the 3 dresses that were hanging up behind the door. And we just grabbed what we could, and we ran downstairs. And by the time we got downstairs, my grandmother was parked outside in her blue car. And the door was open, the neighbors were all out, and my mother was screaming. I don't even remember where my cousin was at this time. I just know my mom and dad was outside, and they were arguing, and my mother was throwing stuff in my grandmother's trunk, and she yanked the bags out of our hands and threw it in the trunk. And my mother looked at my dad, and he dropped to his knees, and she said, you see them? You will never see them again. And he yelled, Elaine, please don't take my children from me. And she said, F you, mother. You know the rest. And she yelled, get in the car, get in the car. And I was like, I began yelling, Daddy, Daddy. And he was on his knees. He had an afro, a big afro, wife beater. His pants was on, but they weren't buttoned. And the neighbors were all outside, and he held his head down, crying. And we got in my grandmother's car, and my mother slammed the car door. And my grandmother started driving off, and I remember looking out the back window screaming, Daddy, Daddy. And the tears, I make no apology for the tears that are coming now, because that was the last time that I ever felt seen, heard, loved, and felt someone excited about hugging me and making me feel important and special. So I'm screaming and looking out the back window, and my dad was still on the ground, and my mother turned around and she looked at me, and for the first time I saw Satan like I never saw him before in her eyes. And she looked at me and she said, shut the F up, you skinny B. She called me a B-I-T-C-H. And she said, I hate you. You're just like those Terrys. And my grandmother looked over at her, and she had her nose turned up, her eyes just angry, looking at me. And I remember closing my mouth and shaking with fear and trying my best to hold back the crying and the tears, and I couldn't do it. But at that moment, fear entered me, and my heart was broken, crushed, damaged, and afraid. As my grandmother drove away, I looked over at my siblings. They were crying, but they didn't look as hysterical as I, but they were hurting too. And I didn't know where that drive was going to take me in my life, but I tell you, if you wait around and hear the rest of my story, you will find out that that drive took me straight to hell. And I want to say this to you all that are listening, and to some of you that may have had the same experience as I as a child, that your parents had problems and issues before you came along, and that was one of my dad's issues. My dad was a very handsome man, and my dad had a lot of siblings, and he grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he didn't have much schooling. I think his last grade was the 6th, and he had to drop out so that he can help his family, get a job and help. And my dad have secrets too that he didn't share and wouldn't share and still hasn't shared, and I don't have a relationship with him to this day. There were times as I go on in my story that I got a chance to see him again, but he had issues as well, and that was one of his issues. Having sex with his niece. That day ruined my life. It broke my heart in ways that even as I'm speaking now, and even though I believe that I'm healed, that part of my heart will always have a pain of losing my dad and gaining a mother that hated me to her being, her core. It changed my life. And now I understood why it was important for me to go to the store with my cousin that day. It was important for me to be nosy and wanting to know what that place was. It was important that we tiptoed down and went in, and the woman was waiting for me. And I believe she was my angel. And she had the oil and prayed, because as she spoke to me that day, you are going to go through some difficult things in your life, that you will suffer, that things are going to happen to you, but God will be with you. It was important that I was anointed that day with oil, and that prayer covered me. And as important as it was that day, it is important this day as well, that covering your children in prayer, because you don't know what they're going to face afterwards or later in life. And I don't know who that woman was, and like I said, I believe she was my angel, and I want to say thank you, Lord. Thank you that you anointed me for such a hell that I would face doing that drive. And I want to say I thank you. I thank you for that time. And so as I end right here, and I have more to come later, I want to say, even though we don't understand the trauma that our parents experienced before they became parents, and what was introduced to them, and what they had to face, even if someone touched my dad as a child, or whoever made it feel like it was okay with incest. It is not for me to judge, because I don't know what caused him to do what he did, or what caused her to do what she did. All I know is what they did. It broke me. It shattered me. It crushed me. And I lost the best part of me at that time. But I want to say to them both, I forgive you. I hold no grudges, no animosity, no ill will. I understand. And everything happens for a reason. It does not mean that I agree with it. It's just that I am gracious enough to give you grace and mercy and forgiveness and unconditional love. And that I hope that the both of you find in yourself to forgive yourself and to not hold that against you, and to find a place in God to surrender it all to Him. Because I found out as I went on in life, we all are flawed and we all make mistakes, and some things happens to us out of our control, and the things that we can't control, do your best with it. And the things that out of control, trust God with it. Don't beat up yourself anymore. And to my sister that was born out of that, I want you to know I love you. I thank God for you. And as I told you years before, I am here. And whatever they did and how you got here, there is no judgment, no anger from me about you. I love you. And I forgive them. It is so important that you heal the childhood trauma, or the childhood trauma will always hurt and trigger and defeat and destroy you in your grown years. I promise you, it's the truth. And I'm learning every day how to make sure that little girl, Monique, that stood in that hallway looking into that living room, that witnessed that traumatic experience, that moment that changed her life in the worst way. It was my duty, and still my duty, to heal her and to make sure she's okay at all times, because it was not her fault. And even though she didn't deserve it, it was a part of her life, and it was already written. And I'm so glad that I'm grown and I'm mature and loving enough to love on that child, because she needed it. And therefore, the little girl Monique, I say to you, beautiful, beautiful soul, as I promised you years ago, I will get you to your healing place. And I'm so glad you matter enough to be healed and whole. And I want you to know we're good. And I always got you. Thank you. Thank you all for listening to my story. And as I stated before, God gets the glory. I will return with another episode. I'm telling you, it was by His grace I made it. Because again, that drive, it drove me to a hell I wouldn't wish on my enemies. Love your inner child and get her to safety, get her to a healing place, because she suffered more than your adult self did. And the only way your adult self is suffering because your child self is still in pain. And until you heal her, or heal him, your adult self will never know what it's like to be healed, whole, happy, and satisfied. I love you all, and I thank God for you listening. Be kind, my dear and my love. Be kind, because you don't know what people are suffering with from their childhood to today. Not everybody had or have somebody to help them unpack that trauma or that pain or that abuse or whatever it is. Be gracious. And if you know someone, don't talk about them or judge them. Ask them, how can I help you heal the inner you? Until we meet again, have a wonderful Friday evening and a beautiful, beautiful weekend. God bless you all. And again, I can't say it enough. I love you and love your